Well, good evening, everyone. Croeso i'r Cynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru ac i'r Pired heno, and diolch yn fawr am dod. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the pier head this evening for what I hope will be a robust discussion examining the evolving role that Wales's flourishing hyper-local movement of community and citizen journalism is playing in reflecting the views of and engaging with communities across Wales. First, I would like to thank particularly those who have agreed to chair tonight's round tables. Thank you very much. You're smiling at the moment. I suspect you may not be smiling quite so much by the end. So the failure of a large section of the UK media and some of the Welsh media to properly report Welsh political life, and in particular the work of the National Assembly for Wales, is leading to a gap in knowledge about Welsh political life. Now, many people in Wales access news through UK media platforms that fail to reflect the huge policy differences in public policy to their Welsh audiences. It means many in Wales are therefore unaware that our schools and hospitals, for example, are governed in a very different way to England. Now, this session follows on from one that we held last month, where we invited leading figures from the UK and Welsh media to discuss the issues. The discussions in that session centred on the UK media's role in covering the Assembly and the responsibility of Assembly members to make that business as interesting and relevant as possible. Now, Peter Riddell, the former deputy editor of The Times, also suggested that Wales needs to look to new media platforms and social networks to fill that gap. So tonight, I want us to move the discussion towards those comments that Peter made, and beyond the traditional media streams, and explore what role the hyper-local community could and should play in plugging what I think is a deficit. Now, there are some in the audience tonight already playing an active role in community-based initiatives, and I would like us to explore their viability in the long term and ask what steps the Assembly should take to help galvanise more people to become active local citizens. Now, the session will take the form of a round-robin round table, which I've not heard of before, but it's a round-robin round table discussion, each lasting about 15 minutes, and at the end of which a bell will sound, and the chairs, not the physical chairs, but the actual chair people, will actually move on to the next table. Now, each chair will be looking at a specific subject area in which they are leading figures, and you, as guests, will have the opportunity to engage in discussions about each subject area. And the four areas are digital media, hyper-local newspapers including Papurau Bro, community radio and local television. I look forward to a frank exchange of views which will be drawn together by our roundtable chairs, who will sum up at the end of tonight's proceedings. So our intention is to share the outcomes of both sessions with you, which will provide us with a foundation for a report on how the National Assembly can work with all sections of the media in Wales to encourage more people to become active citizens. For those of you who wish to tweet about the event, the hashtags are on the tables, and I believe on the holding slide behind me. Now it's time to start those discussions, and I will pass you over to your chairs, and they are Bob Walker from Radio Turcoed, Richard Gurner from Caerphilly Observer, Ken Smith from the Port Talbot Magnet, and Bryn Roberts from Cardiff TV, and Carl Morris from Native HQ. So it's over to the chairs. I hope you have a very interesting evening, and I do look forward to seeing the final report. Diolch yn fawr.
So we were looking at the issue of hyperlocal news provision, both online and newspapers. I think a couple of things really were, that we stressed that hyperlocal is perhaps a bit of a misnomer. It's really reinventing local newspapers. It's recasting local news provision and filling gaps where basically gaps have occurred and where big organisations have basically pulled out of news coverage in towns. And there's different models. The Caerphilly Observer and the Port Talbot Magnet are slightly different models, but have got lots of similarities as well in terms of started off online, went towards a print publication, and are looking at diversifying further. I think the going round the tables on the speed dating revealed a number of recurring themes, which I think were interesting, in the sense of what was the journalistic ethos of local news. How do you make sure that you're engaging with the communities? How do you get them to respond to issues of politics, of the assembly? What is the democratic deficit in that sense, I think, is an important issue. Is it about what's affecting them right in front of their faces, or is it about the broader, bigger issues? And I think the general conclusion was that it's what's on people's doorsteps are the issues that they want to engage with first and foremost. But at the same time, the issues that come up in the Assembly through the Welsh Government are very important as well. But you need that local news filter to make it relevant, to explain, to assess the impact on people in local areas. One of the things that came up in one of the sessions is that we've used in Port Talbot, and it will be going out to other organisations with Cardiff School of Journalism, an application called Little J, which allows the community to participate more in providing news and so on. Another question came up was, is print the answer? Is re-establishing print outlets going back a bit? Are we just harking back? Are we dinosaurs because we started off as print journalists? But I think people feel that it's a way, there's different audiences, and we're not saying that any particular way is the absolute answer at this moment in time. The whole industry is in flux, but the point is that you can cater to different audiences through different outlets. And both publications, the Caerphilly Observer and the Port Talbot Magnet, use online, they use social media, and they also use print. But I think particularly from the point of view of creating a sustainable business, print is a more effective medium, particularly in linking up to advertisers. I think everybody in every session said, well, you've got a real challenge of how do you keep it going, and how do you measure the impact that it's having in terms of addressing issues about the democratic deficit, but also in terms of things like the health and well-being of local communities. Yes, you're closer to the audiences, but are you helping them? Are you engaging with them? Are you making an impact with those audiences? I think, in conclusion, we realise there's still a long way to go. Richard, for the Caerphilly Observer, and myself for the Port Talbot Magnet, we wish each other the greatest of success. We've got different models. One's a social enterprise, one's a sole trader. But we think it's a better model, in a sense, rather than what has happened where the big organisations have effectively deserted towns, that they've left them news deserts where people don't have the information. But also then, in terms of addressing the democratic deficit, the bigger organisations like the BBC, like national newspapers, have nowhere to feed from if you don't have a thriving local news organisation. I was here for the event on the 23rd of May. I think Kevin Maguire, for me, summed it up on one point where he said, cherish your local newspapers, cherish your local news outlets, because you'll miss them when they've gone. And I think that's certainly been the experience in places like Port Talbot and Caerphilly. And that's why we need to see, and give encouragement to organisations like the Caerphilly Observer, like ourselves. There are lots of very practical issues where organisations can help. I think, again, I'm speaking personally here, this didn't come up in any of the sessions, but certainly as a group of 7 creatives, if you want to put it that way, of 7 journalists, getting to grips with doing business planning, finding out where we could get money. We spent a year banging our head against a brick wall with lots of things, and there's lots of information out there, there's lots of support out there, but I think the Assembly could play a big role in bringing that together to make it easier for people who are taking initiatives on the ground actually to get up and running, rather than, because again, I think in the last table we went to, one of the people on it said, hats off to organisations like the Caerphilly Observer, Port Talbot, because it must take a lot of effort. It's a very tough market, and it is quite tough out there, but at the same time, people want to see the provision of news in local areas continue. And I think that's basically a summary of most of the points.
Being more specific about what you think the Assembly as an institution could do to help, because obviously it's a sensitive issue, a political institution being involved in any form of news. I mean, what realistically, in practical terms, do you think the Assembly as an institution could do?
Shall I kick off on that? Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. I think what I was hinting at earlier is I think the Assembly could be a facilitator to help local organisations get established, you know, in a sense of helping overcome some of the barriers to entry in that sense for them. Not a direct funder. I think I wouldn't go down that road. I think it brings certain complications. But, you know, all news organisations have some form of public funding to one degree or another, whether it's newspapers, you know, in terms of the VAT and things like public service notices. So I don't think there's necessarily a level playing field in that sense, and that could be looked at. But I think more importantly, in terms of news, of Assembly stories, then I think it's got to be a case of breaking it down to the localities and making it relevant to localities, you know, so that it moves away from process and what people see as the technicalities and the debates, but towards impact. And the more the Assembly could do that, I think the more that they're likely to get coverage, you know, so that basically all the organisations we're talking about at a local level are pretty much shoestring organisations. They haven't got the time to do the research, to do the backstory. So the more that can be provided of that, I think it will be an assistance. It wouldn't necessarily get in, you know, unedited, but it would definitely be an assistance. I mean, one of the things that came up on one of the tables was quite a strong view that basically that there shouldn't be local council newspapers or propaganda sheets, you know, because they're not covering the news effectively, that they're putting forward a spin on a story. I mean, that's a big discussion, big question. But I think the other side of it for me is that, you know, if there was a provision of a news service through the Assembly working with local newspapers, making people available as well on stories, that would particularly help. You know, I know there is, but it's more getting the channels, you know, meeting each other. Any other questions? Any other points?
North Wales member living in North East Wales, and particularly in North East Wales. Yes, we have a very good relationship with our local papers. Virtually all the AMs are pushing out press releases and bombarding them, and frequently being phone calls to give comments or what have you. But press releases issued by government ministers other than the First Minister, or by shadow ministers or party spokespeople who don't represent that area, generally don't get in, because they're not seen as local. Whereas if it was Westminster, the Minister for, or the Shadow Minister for roads or housing, we would probably get in, because it was recognised that the things they were saying or doing impacted on local people. How are we going to cross that bridge so that local papers in Wales recognise, yes, we want to know what our local representatives are doing, but also we need to know what decisions or dialogue is happening between ministers and their opponents and the other parties in Cardiff in the name of your readers.
Could I just make one quick point on this? And I know Matt's desperate to get us off, because I was here on the 23rd of May, and the people who came from London gave the Assembly members a kick-in, to put it bluntly, and said, you're not interested enough to cover. And I think that was too one-sided. I think there are faults there, but I think at the same time, it's up to us as journalists as well to get to what is interesting and actually report what's interesting, and also probe on what's interesting for people. You know, we've got to be the eyes and ears of the community effectively, and that means holding people to account. It means looking at the detail. The reason, one of the reasons that isn't done any longer, either at local news level or national news level, is because the resources aren't there. There aren't the journalists there to do it, because of the cutbacks that have been made by big national organisations. And I think, you know, that's what we've got to try and do, is create a model where local journalists are there in sufficient numbers to be the eyes and ears of the community, and to translate not just the process of something at the Assembly, but what the impact of it is locally, because people still are interested in that. And you need a robust debate. You need robust coverage. It's as simple as that. You know, I don't think you can escape that.
I'm going to apologise to start with, because I think less than half the time was used to discuss the democratic deficit, because because we're not on air yet, I think more people were asking about what we're going to be doing generally when we go on air in November. Just to say that we will be providing an hour news per weekday and half-hour news on weekend, and there will be one current affairs programme per week. It's inevitable because the Assembly is responsible for things like education and health and transport, that we will be carrying stories that are relevant to Cardiff. We're going to be unashamedly Cardiff-centric, so we'll, but nearly everything that's discussed in the building to my left will involve Cardiff people in one way or the other. It's important that we make it as exciting as possible, because I think the discussion that we did have was that politics, people generally find politics boring. So it is difficult to engage the audience in watching something that they don't particularly have an interest in. So it means presenting it in a way that will appeal to them, and things like if there's a problem with A&E at the University Hospital in the Heath, then that's the kind of thing that will be carried by Made in Cardiff when we go on air. I was asked earlier on, I was interviewed by Radio Wales about this as a pre-recording, and they were saying, well, how do you make the Assembly more sexy for television? Difficult one, I think. Going back to the previous meeting here on the 23rd of May, when Peter Knowles from BBC Parliament said, you know, Assembly members working on their laptops, and we know they're working, don't seem to be engaged with what's happening. And if they don't look to be engaged, why would the viewer at home feel engaged with what's happening? You know, I discussed this with some people last week and explained, well, at least they're there. If you look at Westminster, they're not even in the chamber. I think that's a plus as far as the Assembly is concerned. One of the issues that we will have as Made in Cardiff is the other democratic deficit, which is local councils. I mean, we will be reporting probably as much on issues that County Hall or City Hall will be covering as much, if not more, than the Assembly. But then we will definitely be covering the Assembly, and it is going to be an extra outlet for the Assembly. I mean, cost-wise, we put things in perspective. We have the same budget for the year as S4C has for a week. So we have to make things work in an easy way so that we do cover the Assembly issues. What else was it? The other thing that we will have is second screen. So we will be able to offer things that maybe we won't be offering on our main programmes through the second screen and through links to issues that the Assembly will want to pass on to the public in Cardiff. I think that's more or less it. I mean, it's going to be a real challenge for us, but we're looking forward to it. Good.
I'll ask a question. Mm. Do you think there's potential for linking up with organisations like the
I think we did discuss that on one of the tables. You know, I think it would be a very good thing that there is cross-fertilisation between insofar as that we are Cardiff, I don't know how we would be able to do anything with Port Talbot. Caerphilly is in the area that we will be broadcasting, but we will be, I mean, we are local television and not regional television, and therefore we will be Cardiff. But similar kind of publications in Cardiff, we may well be wanting to join up. And we were talking about community journalism in Whitchurch, and I know there are other parts of Cardiff. Then we will be wanting to talk to people. And somebody was talking, or you were talking about training people in community journalists, and so that we get involved with people that want to offer stories.
So Mark O'Callaghan had a news account affairs at BBC Wales. It's not really a question, it's just a counterblast really to some of the things I've been hearing. I mean, I think it's a real mistake to say and accept that politics is boring. I think in terms of people, the general public, they might, are you interested in politics? If you frame the question that way, they might just say, no, not really, I don't take much about it. If you frame the question differently and say, are you interested in your children's education? Are you interested in health? Are you interested in the economy or how much you get paid? You'll get very different answers. And I think, the job of the media at whatever level is to kind of be creative in how we go about asking those questions and looking for those answers. And certainly with, the Assembly, there's powers here which affect people's daily lives in terms of health, education, and the economy, and that's why it's important. And I think at the local level, I think it's probably true to say that even an organisation which is pretty well resourced like BBC Wales cannot be on every street corner. So there is questions to be asked of councils, and who are going to ask those questions, which is why I think the local debate is so alive and so important, because I think lots of newspapers perhaps don't do that. I mean, I'm old enough to have started on newspapers, and the diet for me in the Midlands was you covered the local councils, and that's where you got your stories from, and it's just incredibly important. And I think just to downplay the relevance of it and how it kind of is a touchstone for people's lives would be a mistake. So I think your outfit, when it gets going, is really rich with opportunities. And if you just go out and ask people what they care about their bins and when they're going to be collected, and how things work. And I think that we've got to be quite creative in how we sell the issues. Yeah, I do think it's there to be done.
No, I think it's doing items which are political issues, but people will have watched it without realising that it is a political issue. We were talking about an issue with schools in Whitchurch, and I was talking with a councillor about building houses on school fields in Llanrymni. Now, that's a story that maybe the person at home doesn't realise it's a political one, but it is certainly an issue for them.
Okay, well, thanks all for listening to me stuttering and umming and ahhing through my presentation. Being the face of community radio normally isn't my forte, but I've been delighted to be able to put our views forward. I think one of the things that came up on every table is how many people listen to your radio station, how many people listen to community radio. Difficult to say. Community radio can't be part of the organisation which monitors radio stations called Radar because we're too small and it doesn't fit with Ofcom's ethos. However, for my own radio station, we have between 7 and 50 listeners online a day, and about 2,000 listeners on FM. For myself, we would be delighted to give the Welsh Assembly Government a higher profile on community radio. I think they do a very good job for Wales. If you are in England, or the national government in England, I don't think they pay too much attention to Wales. So therefore, other organisations have to do it.
Braf cwrdd chi gyd, ac o'n i'n chwilio yn penodol am syniadau a modelau yn y maes neu meysydd cyfryngau digidol. Ac mae yna llwyth o mentra, mae yna pobl yn y stafell yma sydd yn fentro ac yn arloesi yn y maes digidol mwyn adrodd newyddion a hefyd adrodd yn bennaf newyddion lleol ac roedd amrywiaeth o gyfryngau fel radio ar-lein, blogiau ar-lein, a hefyd amrywiaeth o grwpiau fel ymgyrchwyr, arbenigwyr yn meysydd gwahanol fel iechyd, enghraifft, neu addysg, grwpiau lleol a tu hwnt, a hefyd wrth gwrs pobl yn y cyfryngau prif ffrwd newyddiadurwyr fel newyddiadurwyr BBC sy'n manteisio ar cyfryngau digidol mwyn wneud elfennau o waith nhw. So mae'r maes yn anferth, really, byddwn ni'n dweud. Falle doedd dim digon o amser, really, mynd i'r afael gyda'r pynciau gwahanol. Ond dwi'n gallu cynnig rai o'r syniadau sydd wedi dod allan. Mae yna addewid gyda cyfryngau digidol, a mae yna cwmnïau, yn bennaf cwmnïau yn America, yn Silicon Valley, yn addo lot am y posibiliadau a'r potensial o ran cyfryngau digidol. Lleisiau bach yn gallu cael cynulleidfa, ac mae yna eitha lot o hype, byddwn ni'n dweud hefyd. Y cwestiwn ydy pobl yn gweld enghreifftiau penodol o defnydd o gyfryngau digidol yng Nghymru mwyn codi ymwybyddiaeth am waith y cynulliad a jyst i cael... Mae'r Llywodraeth hefyd, Llywodraeth Cymru yn atebol i ni fel dynasyddion. Ydyn ni wir yn gweld fel... Ydyn ni'n cyrraedd y potensial yna. Dwi'n amau bod ni yn gweld gymaint o les o cyfryngau digidol fel pan dyn ni'n ystyried y hype sy'n dod allan o cwmnïau fel Facebook, WordPress a YouTube. So, hefyd mae amrywiaeth o actorion falle yn y maes. Roedd rhywun yn adrodd ymchwil sy'n dweud bod tua 53 o'r 60 o aelod y cynulliad yn defnyddio Twitter. Ond hefyd mae yna cwestiwn o ydyn nhw yn digon diddorol neu ydyn nhw yn digon atyniadol i'r pobl ar y stryd neu ydyn nhw jyst yn apelio at yr arbenigwyr a'r geeks sydd yn ymddiddori yn wleidyddiaeth Cymru eisoes. Roedd yna awgrym hefyd bod yna cynghorwyr sydd yn enwedig cynghorwyr yng Nghaerdydd gallu bod yn gosod enghraifft eitha da falle i'r aelodau cynulliad ac efallai mae yna gwersi yna maen nhw'n gallu ystyried neu mabwysiadu o ran cynghorwyr yn Cyngor Caerdydd. Daeth un syniad allan o menter newyddion gan y cynulliad achos mae yna falle slogan neu rhywbeth mae pobl yn adrodd yn aml iawn am gyfryngau digidol ydy ffaith bod unrhyw cwmni neu sefydliad yn gallu mynd yn uniongyrchol i'r cynulleidfa ac falle does dim cystadleuaeth hyd yn oed rhwng mentrau fel yna a newyddion prif ffrwd. Ni eisiau cryfhau y tirlun neu yr ecosystem o newyddion yng Nghymru ac mae papurau newydd yn gallu cyd fyw gyda gyda mentra annibynnol. Y syniad oedd, falle dylai'r cynulliad yn ogystal â datganiadau i'r wasg a gwaith maen nhw yn wneud trwy cyfryngau prif rhyw neu cyfryngau traddodiadol, falle dylen nhw ystyried rhyw fath o papur neu rhyw fath o menter newyddion sydd yn siarad mewn iaith y pobl ar y stryd i adrodd beth sy'n digwydd yn y cynulliad. Ac wrth gwrs, fel, ni yn gallu disgwyl bod yna falle tueddiad yn y pethau maen nhw yn ei adrodd, ond falle mae yna potensial i rannu mwy o bywyd y cynulliad mewn ffordd hygyrch. Hefyd, roedd eitha lot o bobl yn dweud bod yna, wel, does dim waliau really, rhwng y cyfryngau gwahanol. Mae yna cyflwynwyr BBC newyddiadurwyr yn papur y newydd sy'n manteisio ar Twitter mwyn wneud ymchwil neu mwyn ffeindio ffynhonellau. A does dim wal rhwng enghraifft Twitter a teledu pan mae pobl yn gwylio rhaglenni newyddion neu maen nhw'n gwylio pawb y fan. Yn aml iawn mae yna sgwrs sy'n digwydd uwchben o dan y trafodaeth ar y teledu. So, ac mae teclynau yn cael effaith ar y ffordd mae pobl proffesiynol yn ffeindio newyddion ac yn ymchwilio newyddion. A hefyd wedi rhoi cyfleoedd i ddosbarthu yn fwy effeithiol efallai. Roedd rhywun yn dweud bod Twitter wedi rhoi platform i rai o weinidogion yn Llywodraeth Cymru, achos wedyn mae cyfryngau yn y Deyrnas Unedig yn gallu gweld falle yr enghraifft bod Leighton Andrews yn siarad am rhyw pwnc neu issue, ac mae nhw yn gallu mynd syth at y fe i adrodd straeon o Gymru. So, falle mae yna cyfle yna i trio hwyluso neu pontio rhwng Cymru a'r cyfryngau y cyfryngau Deyrnas Unedig sydd yn fod i gynrychioli ni hefyd, wrth gwrs. Hefyd roedd yna awgrymiadau hefyd o be mae cynulliad yn gallu wneud a sefydliadau fel undebau yn gallu wneud i helpu hwyluso newyddion fel trio datrys y problem really, o diffyg democratiaeth a diffyg newyddion. Un ohonyn nhw oedd hyfforddiant. Roedd yna rhywun o un o'r undebau yn dweud bod modd i unrhyw un, really, pobl yn cymunedau lleol hyd yn oed mynd â cyrsiau a dysgu gyda newyddiadurwyr a wedyn defnyddio'r gwersi yna a'r dealltwriaeth yna mwyn wneud job gwell. Hefyd roedd sôn am data agored o'r cynulliad. Dwi'n ymwybodol o'r ffaith bod cynulliad yn cyhoeddi'r y cofnod ar hyn o bryd mewn ffeiliau sy'n hygyrch i bobl sydd eisiau dadansoddi'r data a trio ffeindio patrymau a trio dadansoddi y trafodaethau sy'n digwydd o ran y cofnod, ond efallai mae yna cyfle i rannu mwy o data o dan trwyddedau agored a trio hwyluso pethau fel yna. A gyda llaw, mae yna newyddiadur'r Raig yn y Western Mail, newyddiadur'r data, a mae hi'n arbenigo yn dadansoddiadau o data sy'n dod o sefydliadau fel y cynulliad. So, hefyd jyst o ran y perthynas rhwng cyfryngau, roedd pobl yn siarad lot am y perthynas rhwng cyfryngau prif ffrwd a cyfryngau digidol. Ac mae'n cryfhau mewn ffordd y rôl i pobl proffesiynol sy'n dadansoddi'r straeon, yr arbenigwyr gobeithio. Yn aml iawn mae pethau'n dechrau ar y stryd falle neu mewn cymunedau, ac maen nhw'n gallu ffiltro wedyn trwyddo i newyddiadurwyr proffesiynol sydd eisiau mae gyda nhw adnoddau i ymchwilio straeon a dadansoddi straeon a wneud job nhw. So, y cwestiwn really ydy fel jyst i orffen, sut ydyn ni'n gallu hwyluso'r cydweithrediad wedyn rhwng y pobl proffesiynol a'r ymgyrchwyr neu pobl sy'n gwneud pethau ar sail gwirfoddol. Ac roedd heno yn help hefyd. Roedd lot o pobl yn cwrdd am y tro cyntaf yn y stafell yma. Felly mae cyfleoedd fel heno maen nhw yn cyfleoedd i gwrdd y pobl fel ar draws sectorau gwahanol. So, dwi'n croesawu unrhyw cwestiynau neu pwyntiau.
Fi jyst yn gofyn, yn un ar data, ydych chi'n siarad am rannu'r data, os yna rhywun sydd yn datblygu rhywbeth fel They Work For You yma yng Nghymru, achos fi wedi sain o lan i updates gan San Steffan, gan rai o'r aelodau seneddol yn fardal i, mae'n rili dda i gallu rhoi geiriau mewn keywords fel petai i gael yr e-byst hynny trwyddo. Fi'n credu mwyn ni fel aelodau cynulliad i fod yn fwy effeithiol i gyfathrebu gyda pobl. Tys yna pynciau o ddiddordeb i bobl, gallen nhw arwyddo lan wedyn i'r system hynny. A'r ail cwestiwn yw, beth mae'r aelodau yn Lloegr, y cynghorwyr yma, ydych chi'n sôn am wneud sydd yn llawer mwy ddiddorol na yr hyn dyn ni'n wneud o ran tweets fel aelodau cynulliad? Fi'n
mynd i ateb yr ail cwestiwn yn gyntaf. Dwi'n gallu cyflwyno ti'r person wnaeth wneud y sylw, ond roedden nhw'n sôn am cynghorwyr yng Nghaerdydd yn bennaf. Yn personol, roedden nhw'n teimlo bod y cynghorwyr yn gosod model gwell o ran ymgysylltu na rai o'r aelodau cynulliad maen nhw wedi gweld. Adrodd oedden ni, na gyd. O beth sydd yn sicr ydy, fel ydyn ni yn edrych at enghreifftiau o pethau fel yna. Oes yna'r llif o syniadau rhwng cynghorwyr a aelodau cynulliad a staff nhw am siwt, achos mae pob aelod cynulliad yn gwas sifil sydd yn atebol i'r cyhoedd. So, dyn ni'n rhannu'r gwersi. Ydw i wedi ateb y cwestiwn? Gobeithio. A hefyd, o ran They Work For You, yn anffodus, yn senedd ni, ydy'r unig senedd sydd ddim ar cronfa data, really. Mae Gogledd Iwerddon, Alban a Lloegr, maen nhw i gyd ar They Work For You. Ond gobeithio, achos mae'r cynulliad, un o'r problemau oedd y fformat y data mae cynulliad yn defnyddio i gyhoeddi'r cofnod a dogfennau fel yna. A mae cwestiwn o trwyddedau hawlfraint yn un pwysig hefyd. Ond gobeithio mae'n mynd i fod yn haws nawr i cyfieithu y data mwyn bwyd o pethau fel They Work For You, achos mae yn hytrach na fformat fler mympwyol, maen nhw wedi gosod fformat fel cyson nawr, fi'n trio dweud. So, ac mae croeso i unrhyw un helpu. They Work For You di prosiect o dan My Society, a maen nhw'n derbyn nhw di un o sefydliadau mwyaf arloesol o ran democratiaeth a defnydd o teclyn a digidol. Felly mae croeso i unrhyw un yn ystafell cydweithio gyda nhw, neu hyd yn oed i'r cynulliad siarad gyda nhw mwyn hwyluso'r llif o data. Nid yn unig y cofnod, ond dwi'n meddwl am dogfennau eraill a adroddiadau polisi. Dwi'n cymryd bod yn llwyth o data yna o bob math sy'n dod allan o ymchwil, a bod y defnydd gwell o data sy'n bodoli eisoes yn wych o ran be dyn ni'n trio wneud. So.
My name is Robert Andrews. I'm a journalist covering the business of digital media. So I think the problem that the Assembly has identified is how can it keep citizens engaged? And it seems to me that the debate so far has sort of centred around helping others to do that on its behalf. I guess principally through two classes of correspondent. On the one hand, big media, which we know is an industry in recession, so that is a fragile prospect for big media continuing to communicate the business of the Assembly. And then grassroots people, many of whom are here tonight, and I have a lot of respect for, but the business models of which are slim and often based on grant funding. So that's a fragile prospect as well. So I think we can say that neither of those opportunities are really solid bases going forward to go on and communicate the business of the Assembly. In digital media, there's this adage nowadays that any company can be a media company. And principally, that comes from marketing. Marketers are very excited about the new opportunities that digital media are allowed to communicate for themselves and not to have that be mediated. So I think that the Assembly need not rely wholly on having its business, its communication mediated by third parties. So there are opportunities to use existing third-party platforms, like we've talked about, the social networks, or even to build a platform to do that job. It might not be very fashionable to say or to recommend that a government should build its own big IT infrastructure or platform. Often those things go horribly wrong. But when you look at what the likes of gov.uk have done on static information, distilling the essence of what government does down and communicating that effectively. And then on rolling information, when you look at the things that the likes of They Work For You have done, the My Society guys, doing excellent work on turning the business of a political institution into really accessible information. It's great, and I think it's embarrassing that the business of the Assembly still isn't on They Work For You after so many years. So when it comes to council papers, or just going with this idea that any company can be a media company, I believe that it's not just I believe it's not just, I think it's the duty of councils to communicate to citizens the business of what those councils are up to. I think that all those citizens have a right to know that. So this is an idea of government as a service, government as a platform. If the Assembly made its records, made all of its business available in a very accessible platform, if there was a way for me as a citizen to subscribe to the information, everything that my elected member is doing, all of the stuff that's going on in my local community, and made it fresh and interesting and live and exciting, that I would value that. I think citizens would value that if it was a platform provided by the Assembly as an agnostic service provider, if you like, not even a platform provided by an Assembly member. So we needn't get bogged down and be scared by the earlier talk, for example, of the Assembly becoming a media owner. This is not the Assembly buying the Western Mail, and nor would being a platform operator diminish journalists' ability to go on and do their own investigations, as you said, perhaps using some of that data. So I just wanted to float out there what I think is possibly a controversial notion, but provide a very accessible platform straight from the horse's mouth.
I've just got a couple of little points to make, really, and they're more of information. But yesterday there was a conference in Cardiff called the yw'r conference, set up by Tony Dowling, who's just taken over the South Wales Evening Post. And there was about 200 people there. And one of the themes was power and control tend to be culture within institutions and big businesses, some of them, and that the culture of the internet is about influence and impact. And that, I think, is something that really has to be, analysed in terms of this, because people don't want media online that is about power and control. Nobody likes it. And the other thing is just a little point of information of a project that I'm involved in, which I'm really proud about, and which is actually funded by the Welsh Government, and it's called the FYI Network, and we are attempting to investigate how digital means can help with economic regeneration. So we're in Neath at the moment, and we're going to Brecon, Craighowell and Talgarth. And we are an internet team. We don't have any journalists, but we do have content creators. And we do what the people in the town ask us to do. So we've just made a bride's guide to Neath, which ran as a series for a couple of weeks on Facebook and on our site. And we're now making that into a multimedia online book, which will be video, text and images. And people have found this so interesting in the digital world that 4 weeks ago we went to Facebook to talk about it, and a couple of hundred have cool London digerati listen to our story and what we're measuring and the progress. So I just thought you'd like to know about that, and that there is something, you know, I think quite exciting going on in Wales.
Well, hello everyone, I'm David Melding, I'm the Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm afraid I was in the Assembly chairing proceedings until 6:30, so I've only been here the last 45 minutes. But I have to say, hearing the various groups report back has been fascinating, and I think full of ideas. A lot of them challenging. The last one I thought was very interesting indeed, or the last couple rather, in terms of what the Assembly could do for, it was almost engagement really, rather than urging others to think we're relevant enough to write about. But I have to say, this afternoon's debates, one was on cancer services. I think that would interest everyone. Transport, particularly integrated transport, and apprenticeships. And then we had a short debate on hospital reconfiguration. I know all those subjects are absolutely at the heart of not only Wales as a whole, but also local communities. So I think we've got to do something. I'm told newspapers were invented in the English Civil War. It's called the English Civil War. It affected us all, but anyway. And quite an elite thing for a couple of centuries. And then in the mid-19th century, literacy and the availability of cheap newsprint and technology to use it transformed what newspapers are capable of doing. And I suppose with the digital revolution, we've not quite worked out how organisations or institutions like the Assembly can have a direct contact with citizens and engagement. But I think we're working towards some interesting suggestions that need to be tried out, and we need to remodel the way we work and really look at all the things we do. Someone just talked about the record of proceedings. You know, Hansard used to be the only record you'd ever have of Parliament. Our legal record actually now is not the record of proceedings, it is the audio tape. That's what would probably get used in a court of law if there was ever a dispute. So, you know, times change and we need to change with them. And of course, you're dealing with lots of people like me in their 50s who are not really that adept at change. But I'm glad to say you've got people like Bethan here, who is a great tweeter. Mark Isherwood also, I apologize, there may have been other AMs here earlier, but it's just ever so encouraging to see AMs engaging in this sort of work as well. So we don't know the answers yet, but there are some, I think, intimations of what could really work, but a lot of it will be to have the courage to reshape and take advantage of the opportunity of new forms of participation and reportage as well. I think that will be very much part of it. Anyway, in the Assembly, we're particularly grateful for all of you who have come along and have given of your time and intellect this evening, particularly to the facilitators who've made the whole thing work and reported back. I look forward to getting a full report. It will be combined with the other seminar we had on more than the national UK press rather, and how they look at the Assembly. But I think there's more grounds for hope. I did attend the other one for nearly the whole event, but I've heard more things of interest and more signs of hope in the last 40 minutes than I probably picked up in that seminar, and that one wasn't unproductive, let me say that. That was very useful, some of the things they were saying. Anyway, I can't say it's a wonderful night. Mae hi'n ddiflas heno yn ffodus. But so you're not going to go off to your garden and a nice glass of white wine, but I'm sure you've got other things to do, even as you battle through the rain to get home. But many thanks for the safe journey. Hwyl.